scissors shook in Clara Whitmore's hand as she stood alone in the small attic room, staring at the uneven patches on her scalp in the cracked mirror. Downstairs, someone was pounding on the servant's door, shouting that carriages were coming up the drive an hour early. She had no time. She grabbed a plain gray scarf, wrapped it tightly around her head, and shoved the scissors under a loose floorboard where no one would ever think to look. Her hands were trembling, but not from the cold. 3 weeks ago, a cruel act from her past had left sections of her hair broken and thin, some patches gone completely. She had told everyone at Ashbourne Hall that she suffered from a fever that made her hair fall out. It was a lie, but it was safer than the truth. The truth would bring questions. Questions would bring shame. And shame, in a house like this, could cost a woman her position, her shelter, and her only chance at a decent life. Footsteps thundered up the narrow servant stairs. Mrs. Bennet, the head housekeeper, burst into the room without knocking, her face pale with panic. "He is here," Mrs. Bennet said. "The Duke of Ashbourne. His carriage just turned onto the drive. We were told next week." Next week? Clara. Not today. Clara's stomach dropped. She had heard stories about Duke Edmund Harcourt since the day she arrived at the estate 3 months earlier. He was known to be sharp-eyed, exacting, and impossible to fool. Servants who displeased him did not simply receive a warning. They vanished from the household within the day. She tightened the scarf around her head and followed Mrs. Bennet down the stairs, her heart pounding harder with every step. The main hall was already in chaos. Footmen straightened their coats. A young maid nearly dropped a tray of polished silver. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered to the floor, and a voice cursed under its breath before catching itself. Clara pressed herself against the wall near the linen closet, hoping to disappear into the background, the way she had learned to do these past 3 months. Being unseen was safety. Being noticed was danger. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The great front doors opened, and cold autumn wind swept into the hall, carrying with it the sound of boots on stone. Duke Edmund Harcourt stepped inside, tall and imposing, his dark coat still damp from the drizzle outside. His eyes moved across the hall, with the practiced precision of a man who missed nothing. Servants bowed and curtsied in a wave, like grass bending before wind. Clara curtsied along with the others, keeping her head low, her scarf secure. She thought she had escaped his notice entirely. Then, just as she began to rise, a gust of wind from the still open door caught the edge of her scarf and pulled it loose. It slipped from her head and fell to the floor before she could catch it. For one terrible second, the hall went silent. Clara froze, her damaged hair exposed for anyone to see, patches thin and uneven, a few small scars visible beneath. She heard a maid nearby gasp softly. She felt heat rush to her face. Every instinct told her to run, to flee back up the stairs, and never come down again. But her feet would not move. Duke Edmund's gaze had already found her. He did not look away, and he did not look at her the way others often did, with pity or disgust hiding behind polite smiles. His expression was unreadable, calm, and startlingly direct. He studied her for a long moment, as though trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly appeared in front of him. Clara bent quickly, snatched the scarf from the floor, and wrapped it back around her head with shaking hands. She kept her eyes down, praying he would simply move on, that this moment would be forgotten by supper. "You there," the Duke said. Clara's whole body went still. She lifted her eyes just enough to see that he was speaking to her, and only her. The hall around them seemed to hold its breath. "Yes, Your Grace?" She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your name," he said. It was not a question so much as a command, spoken evenly, without cruelty, but without room for refusal either. "Clara, Your Grace. Clara Whitmore." He said nothing else. He simply nodded once, turned, and allowed Mrs. Bennet to lead him toward the study, already speaking of estate matters, ledgers, and the state of the eastern fields. Just like that, the moment passed, and the hall returned to its usual bustle of activity, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But Clara knew something had shifted. She could feel it in the way her chest still tightened, in the way her hands would not stop trembling, even after she returned to folding linens in the small room off the kitchen. The Duke had seen her, truly seen her, not as a servant blending into the background, but as a person with a secret, written plainly across her scalp for anyone bold enough to look. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of quiet dread, waiting for the summons that would surely come, the one where she would be dismissed for appearing before the master of the house looking less than presentable. Servants who caused a stir were not kept long at Ashbourne Hall. She had seen 2 housemaids let go in her short time there, one for breaking a vase, another for arriving late twice in a single week. Surely a scarred and thinning head of hair, revealed before the Duke himself on his very first day back, would be enough to end her position entirely. By evening, no summons came. Clara helped serve the evening meal in the smaller dining room, reserved for the Duke when he dined alone, though she was careful to keep to the shadows near the sideboard, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, without ever meeting his eyes directly. She noticed, however, that he seemed distracted throughout the meal, glancing toward the door more than once, as though expecting someone to enter. It was not until she was clearing the final course that she realized he was glancing toward her. "Leave us," the Duke said to the footman standing near the door. The young man bowed and exited without question, closing the door softly behind him. Clara remained frozen near the sideboard, uncertain whether she had been included in the order to leave, or whether she was meant to stay and finish her duties. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Not you," the Duke said, as though reading her thoughts. "Come here, Clara Whitmore." There was nowhere to hide from that voice. She set down the empty tray she had been holding and approached the long dining table, stopping a respectful distance away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron to keep them from shaking. The Duke studied her for a moment, the candlelight casting shadows across his sharp features. He did not speak right away, and the silence stretched long enough that Clara felt certain she would lose her position before the night was through. "This morning," he said finally, "your scarf fell." Clara's throat tightened. "Forgive me, Your Grace. It was an accident. The wind." "I am not asking for an apology," he said, cutting her off gently, but firmly. "I am asking a question." She waited, unsure what to say, unsure what he could possibly want to know. "Who did this to you?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. No one had asked her that directly since she arrived at Ashbourne Hall. Everyone accepted the story of the fever, either because they believed it, or because they did not care enough to question it. But the Duke's eyes held no acceptance of easy lies. He was looking at her, as though he already suspected the truth was far more complicated than fever and misfortune. "I do not understand your meaning, Your Grace," Clara said carefully, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think you understand perfectly well," he said. His tone was not harsh, but it left no room for pretending otherwise. "A fever does not leave marks like the ones I saw beneath your scarf. Scars do that. Someone caused this. I am asking who." Clara's mind raced through every possible response, every lie she might offer to end this conversation, and escape back to the safety of the kitchen. But something in his steady gaze made the lies feel useless before she even spoke them. He would see through her, the way he had seen through her scarf. "It does not matter who, Your Grace," she said quietly. "It is done. It cannot be undone." "It matters to me," he said. Clara looked up at him then, truly looked at him for the first time since he had arrived, and saw something unexpected in his expression. Not pity, not curiosity for its own sake. Something closer to quiet anger, the kind a person feels on behalf of someone else, not for themselves. "Why would it matter to you, Your Grace?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "I am only a maid in your household. You do not know me." "No," he agreed. "I do not know you. Not yet." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight Clara did not fully understand. Before she could respond, the Duke rose from his chair, straightened his coat, and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly before leaving the room. "You may go, Clara Whitmore," he said, his back still turned to her. "But I will ask you again. Perhaps not tonight, but I will ask." And then he was gone, leaving Clara standing alone in the dim dining room, her heart pounding, with a mixture of fear and something else she could not quite name, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She returned to her small attic room, long after the rest of the household had settled into sleep. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, unwinding the scarf slowly, staring once more at the reflection in the cracked mirror. The damage was still there, still real, still a mark of everything she had survived, and everything she had tried to bury. For 3 weeks, She had told herself the story did not matter anymore, that the past was behind her, that all she needed to do was work quietly, stay unnoticed, and build a new life brick by careful brick. But the Duke's question echoed in her mind long after the candle burned low. Who did this to you? No one had asked her that with such determination in a very long time. No one had looked at her scars and seen a wrong that needed answering, rather than a flaw to be hidden away. Clara did not sleep well that night. She lay awake, listening to the wind outside her small window, thinking of the Duke's steady gaze, the quiet anger in his voice, and the strange, unsettling feeling that her carefully hidden past was no longer entirely her own secret to keep. Somewhere below her, in the great house that now felt far less predictable than it had that morning, Duke Edmund Harcourt sat alone in his study, staring into the fire, his mind returning again and again to the image of a young woman's trembling hands as she tried to hide something she had clearly spent weeks trying to bury. He did not yet know her story, but he intended to find it. And for reasons he could not fully explain, even to himself, he found that he could not stop thinking about the courage it must have taken for her to keep working, keep serving, keep standing tall, in a house full of strangers, while carrying wounds no one else had bothered to ask about. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask again. Morning came too quickly for Clara. She woke before dawn, as she always did, but this time her first thought was not of chores or schedules. It was of the Duke's voice asking who did this to you, and the way he had said he would ask again. She dressed quickly, wound the gray scarf around her head with practiced care, and made her way down to the kitchen, hoping that a full day of work would push the memory of last night out of her mind. It did not. Mrs. Bennet met her at the bottom of the stairs, her arms already full of linens. The Duke wants breakfast served in the small study today, not the dining room, she said, and Clara, he asked that you be the one to bring it. Clara's stomach twisted. Me, Mrs. Bennet? Surely one of the senior maids would be more suitable. He asked for you by name, Mrs. Bennet said, raising an eyebrow with obvious curiosity. I do not know what happened between you and his Grace last night, but you would do well to be careful, girl. Dukes do not usually take notice of housemaids unless there is trouble brewing. Clara wanted to explain, wanted to say that nothing improper had happened, that the Duke had simply asked a question she could not answer honestly, but she said nothing, only nodded and accepted the tray of tea, bread, and preserves that had been prepared for the morning meal. The walk to the small study felt longer than it should have. Clara balanced the tray carefully, her mind spinning with possibilities. Perhaps he intended to dismiss her after all, and this private meeting was simply a courtesy before sending her away. Perhaps he wanted answers she still was not ready to give. Perhaps, and this thought frightened her more than the others, perhaps he simply wanted to know her better, and she had no idea what that would mean for a woman in her position. She knocked softly on the study door. Enter, came the Duke's voice from within. Clara pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped inside, finding Duke Edmund Harcourt seated at a large wooden desk covered in papers and ledgers, morning light spilling in through tall windows behind him. He looked up as she entered, and for a brief moment, something in his expression softened before returning to its usual composed calm. Set it here, he said, gesturing to a small table near the window. Clara did as instructed, arranging the tea things with steady hands despite the nervous flutter in her chest. She turned to leave, hoping to slip out quietly before any further questions could be asked. Stay a moment, the Duke said. She stopped near the door, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. Yes, Your Grace. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair across from his desk. Clara hesitated. Servants did not sit in the presence of their employers, not unless specifically told there would be no consequence for doing so. But refusing a direct instruction from the Duke seemed equally unwise. She crossed the room slowly and lowered herself into the chair, perching on the very edge, as though ready to spring up at the first sign of displeasure. You look as though you expect me to scold you, the Duke observed, a faint trace of dry humor in his voice. I do not know what to expect, Your Grace, Clara admitted honestly. You are not like the other members of the household I have served. No, he agreed. I imagine I am not. He set down his pen and studied her for a long moment, the same careful, assessing look he had given her the night before. Clara forced herself to meet his gaze this time, refusing to shrink beneath it the way fear urged her to do. I spoke with Mrs. Bennet this morning, he said. She tells me you arrived at Ashbourne Hall 3 months ago, with excellent references from a household in the northern counties. She also tells me you keep to yourself, work harder than most of the other staff, and have caused no trouble whatsoever. Clara said nothing, waiting to see where this line of conversation would lead. She also tells me, the Duke continued, that you explained your hair as the result of a fever. Yes, Your Grace. I do not believe that is true. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. With respect, Your Grace, I did not think my personal history was a matter that concerned my employment here. Normally, he said, you would be correct. A servant's past is their own business, so long as it does not follow them into my household in ways that cause harm. But I find myself unable to simply move past what I witnessed yesterday. The marks on your scalp were not caused by illness. They were caused by cruelty. I have seen enough of both in my life to know the difference. Clara's throat tightened. She had not expected him to press so directly, nor had she expected the quiet certainty in his voice, as though he had encountered such cruelty before, and recognized its signature immediately. Why does it matter so much to you, Your Grace? She asked again, echoing her question from the previous night. I am one maid among dozens in your household. Surely there are more pressing matters requiring your attention. The Duke leaned back in his chair, considering her question with evident seriousness, rather than dismissing it as she had expected. There are many pressing matters, he admitted. Estate finances, tenant disputes, matters requiring my presence in the city more often than I would like. And yet none of those matters kept me awake last night, the way your face did when your scarf fell to the floor. Clara's breath caught. She had not expected such honesty from him, had not expected a man of his position and reputation to admit something so personal, so plainly. I saw fear in your eyes, he continued, but not the fear of embarrassment alone. I saw the fear of someone who has learned that revealing the truth brings punishment rather than help. I have seen that particular fear before, Clara Whitmore, and I have never once been able to walk away from it without asking questions. She studied him carefully, searching his face for signs of pity or performance, the kind of false concern she had encountered before, from people who wanted to appear kind without actually caring. But she found none of that in his expression, only quiet, steady patience, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for her to trust him. It happened before I came here, Clara said finally, the words slipping out before she could stop them. In my previous position. The Duke remained silent, giving her space to continue without pressure. I worked for a family in the northern counties, as Mrs. Bennet told you, Clara said, her voice growing quieter. The lady of the house had a son who was set to be married soon. I was young, and foolish enough to be kind to him when he was lonely, nothing more than conversation and simple companionship during difficult days. But his mother believed I had ambitions beyond my station. She believed I intended to trap her son into some sort of scandal, to force a marriage that would elevate my position. And she blamed you for suspicions alone, the Duke said, his voice hardening slightly. She accused me of things I never did, Clara said, and when words alone did not satisfy her anger, she took matters into her own hands. She cut my hair in places, roughly, unevenly, meant to mark me so that no other household would hire a woman who looked as though she had been punished for wrongdoing. She wanted everyone to see and assume the worst, without ever knowing the truth. The room fell silent, except for the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her hands, unable to look at the Duke directly as she finished the story she had kept hidden for so long. I left that household with no references from her, only a small note from the housekeeper who knew the truth, and pitied me enough to help me find passage south. I invented the story of a fever because the truth would follow me from house to house otherwise, branding me as someone dangerous or dishonest before anyone even had the chance to know me. When she finally looked up, she found the Duke's expression had changed entirely. The careful composure was gone, replaced by something sharper, something that burned quietly beneath the surface. What is her name? He asked. Your Grace? The woman who did this to you. What is her name? Clara hesitated. I do not see what purpose that would serve. Your Grace. It is done. The damage cannot be reversed, and pursuing the matter further would only bring more trouble than it is worth. That is not your decision alone to make, the Duke said, though not unkindly. Cruelty left unanswered simply teaches the cruel that they may continue without consequence. I have spent my life among people who believe their position grants them the right to harm others without accountability. I do not share that belief. Clara felt something shift inside her chest, something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope, fragile and uncertain, but present nonetheless. You would do this for a housemaid you barely know? She asked. I would do this, the Duke said, because it is right. Whether you were a housemaid or a duchess would make no difference to me. Before Clara could respond, a sharp knock interrupted the moment, and a footman entered with an urgent message concerning a dispute among the tenant farmers on the eastern edge of the estate. The Duke rose immediately, his expression shifting back to the composed authority Clara had first witnessed upon his arrival. We will speak of this again, he said to Clara as he gathered his coat. This conversation is not finished. Clara nodded, gathering the tea tray and preparing to return to her duties, though her mind remained fixed on everything that had just been shared between them. As she made her way back toward the kitchen, she caught sight of her reflection in a hallway mirror, the gray scarf still hiding the marks beneath. For the first time in 3 weeks, she did not feel entirely alone in carrying that burden. Word of the private meeting between the Duke and the new housemaid spread through the household by midday, as such things always did in a house full of servants with little else to occupy their curiosity. Whispers followed Clara through the corridors, some kind, wondering what special favor she had earned, others sharper, suggesting she had used some manner of trick to gain the Duke's attention. Clara ignored them all as best she could, focusing on her work, though she found herself glancing toward the study more than once throughout the afternoon, wondering what the Duke intended to do with the information she had shared. She did not have to wait long to find out. That evening, as she prepared to retire to her small attic room, Mrs. Bennet appeared at her door with an unusual expression, somewhere between confusion and reluctant respect. His Grace has requested that you be moved to different quarters, Mrs. Bennet said. A room closer to the main house, with a proper window and fireplace. He said something about ensuring the comfort of those under his care. Clara stared at her in disbelief. There must be some mistake, Mrs. Bennet. Surely such quarters are reserved for more senior members of staff. There is no mistake, Mrs. Bennet said, though her tone suggested she found the situation just as puzzling as Clara did. Whatever you said to him this morning, girl, it seems to have made quite an impression. As Clara gathered her few belongings and followed Mrs. Bennet toward her new quarters, she could not shake the feeling that something significant had shifted within the walls of Ashbourne Hall, something that would carry her story into places she had never imagined it might go. Somewhere in the house, Duke Edmund Harcourt sat at his desk long after the household had gone quiet, a single piece of paper in front of him, bearing a name he intended to investigate thoroughly. Beside it lay a second note, written in his own careful hand, instructing his personal physician to prepare remedies known to encourage healthy hair growth, to be delivered discreetly to the housemaid's new quarters by morning. But for the first time in a long while, he found himself looking forward to finding out. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, sealed with wax and addressed in a hand the Duke did not recognize. He read it twice at his desk before setting it down and staring out the window toward the eastern fields, his jaw tight with restrained anger. The investigator he had quietly hired confirmed everything Clara had told him, and more besides. The woman responsible for her injuries had a name now, a household, a reputation of her own, that painted a very different picture than the respectable lady she pretended to be in public. A widow with considerable influence among the northern gentry, known for hosting elegant gatherings, and for a temper that servants whispered about, but rarely dared to name aloud. The Duke folded the letter and locked it in the top drawer of his desk, not yet ready to act, but no longer willing to let the matter rest either. Meanwhile, life at Ashbourne Hall had grown noticeably strange for Clara. Her new quarters near the main house were warmer and more comfortable than anything she had known in years, but the change had not gone unnoticed by the other staff. Whispers followed her through the corridors, and one voice in particular seemed determined to make her life difficult. Priscilla Hart had served as senior housemaid at Ashbourne Hall for nearly 6 years, and she made it clear from the very first day that she resented any attention Clara received from the Duke. It began with small things. Misplaced linens blamed on Clara. A broken teacup she claimed Clara had dropped, though Clara had not been anywhere near the china cabinet that morning. You think a fine room and a bit of kindness from His Grace makes you better than the rest of us, Priscilla said one afternoon. cornering Clara near the laundry room. "Girls like you never last long in houses like this. Someone always finds a way to remind you where you belong." Clara held her ground, though her heart pounded uncomfortably. "I have done nothing to earn your dislike, Priscilla. I only wish to do my work and cause no trouble." "Trouble follows you already," Priscilla said with a cold smile. "I have heard the other maids talking. Fever indeed. Everyone knows fevers do not leave scars like the ones hiding under that scarf of yours. I wonder what His Grace would think if he learned there might be more to your story than you have told him." The threat hung in the air, and Clara felt a familiar chill spread through her chest, the same fear she had carried since leaving Thornfield Manor months ago. She had told the Duke everything, or nearly everything, but the thought of her private history becoming fodder for servants' gossip filled her with dread. "I have told His Grace the truth," Clara said carefully, refusing to let her voice shake. "There is nothing left for you to threaten me with." Priscilla's eyes narrowed, clearly displeased that her attempt to intimidate had not landed as intended, but she said nothing further, only turned and walked away with a sharp swish of her skirts. That evening, Clara found herself summoned once again to the small study, though this time it was Lady Vera Harcourt, the Duke's younger sister, who awaited her rather than the Duke himself. Lady Vera was a striking woman, with sharp features and an even sharper gaze, recently arrived from the capital for an extended visit. "So you are the girl my brother has taken such sudden interest in," Lady Vera said, studying Clara from head to toe, without any attempt to disguise her scrutiny. "He has spoken of you at dinner, more than once this week. That is unusual for Edmund. He rarely speaks of the household staff at all." Clara curtsied respectfully, unsure how to respond to such directness. "I am only a housemaid, my lady. I could not say why His Grace would mention me." "Do not play the modest servant with me," Lady Vera said, though not unkindly. "I know my brother well enough to recognize when something has caught his attention in a way that concerns me. He has responsibilities to this family, obligations that extend far beyond his own preferences. I would hate to see him distracted from matters that truly require his focus." "I have no intention of distracting His Grace from anything, my lady," Clara said carefully. "I only wish to perform my duties and remain unnoticed." Lady Vera's expression softened slightly, though suspicion remained clear in her eyes. "Perhaps that is true, or perhaps you are more clever than you appear, using quiet humility to draw exactly the kind of attention you claim to avoid. Either way, know this. My brother has a duty to this family that includes securing an appropriate marriage, one that strengthens our position and honors the memory of our parents. Whatever kindness he shows you now, do not mistake it for anything more than a passing concern for a servant's welfare." The words stung more than Clara expected, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "I understand completely, my lady. I expect nothing from His Grace beyond fair treatment as an employee of this household." "See that you remember it," Lady Vera said, rising from her seat and moving toward the door. "There are matches already being discussed for my brother, connections that would benefit this family greatly. I would advise you to keep that in mind before allowing yourself to hope for anything beyond what your position allows." After Lady Vera departed, Clara remained alone in the study for several long minutes, her chest tight with a complicated mixture of emotions she did not fully understand. She had not allowed herself to hope for anything beyond safety and a stable position within the household. The idea that others might already perceive something more developing between herself and the Duke felt both frightening and, in some small hidden corner of her heart, strangely thrilling. She pushed the thought away firmly. Lady Vera was right to be cautious. A Duke did not court housemaids, whatever kindness he might show them. Clara had learned long ago that hoping for more than her circumstances allowed only led to disappointment and pain. Later that night, as Clara made her way back toward her quarters, she overheard voices coming from a partially open door near the servants' entrance. She recognized Priscilla's voice immediately, speaking in hushed, urgent tones to someone Clara could not identify. If Lady Ashford knew the girl was here, working in a household of such standing, gaining the Duke's favor no less, I imagine she would have quite a lot to say about it, Priscilla was saying. Perhaps a letter to Thornfield Manor might be worth the postage. Clara froze in the shadows, her blood running cold. Priscilla intended to write to Lady Ashford, to alert the very woman who had caused her so much suffering that Clara had found a new life, a new position, and perhaps even the beginnings of the Duke's genuine regard. If Lady Ashford learned of this, there was no telling what lies or accusations she might spread to protect her own reputation and destroy Clara's newfound stability. Clara retreated quietly to her room, her mind racing with fear and determination in equal measure. She could not allow Priscilla's cruelty to undo everything she had worked so hard to rebuild. She would need to speak with the Duke, to warn him before Priscilla's letter could cause irreparable damage. The next morning, Clara requested a private audience with the Duke through Mrs. Bennet, who eyed her with growing curiosity but asked no questions, simply arranging the meeting for later that afternoon. When Clara entered the study, the Duke looked up from his papers with an expression of genuine concern, clearly noticing the tension written across her face. "Something has happened," he said, rising from his chair. "Tell me." Clara explained everything she had overheard: Priscilla's threats, the intention to write to Lady Ashford, the fear that her carefully rebuilt life might collapse before it had truly begun. The Duke listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail she shared. "You need not fear Priscilla Hart," he said when she finished, "nor Lady Ashford, should she choose to involve herself further in matters that no longer concern her. You do not understand, Your Grace," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "Lady Ashford has influence among the gentry. If she chooses to spread false accusations about my character, it could ruin any chance I have of maintaining honest employment anywhere in this country." "I do understand," the Duke said firmly, "which is precisely why I have already begun looking into the matter myself. I know Lady Ashford's name, Clara. I have known it for 2 days now." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "You investigated her?" "I told you I would ask questions until I found answers," he said. "And what I have learned confirms everything you told me, and reveals a pattern of cruelty toward those in her employ that extends well beyond your own experience. Lady Ashford is not the untouchable figure she believes herself to be." Relief flooded through Clara, though uncertainty remained close behind it. "What do you intend to do, Your Grace?" "For now, nothing rash," he said. "But know this. Whatever letters Priscilla Hart chooses to send, whatever lies Lady Ashford might attempt to spread, you are under my protection now. No accusation will be believed without evidence, and no threat will be allowed to harm you while you remain in this household." Clara felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensation of having someone stand firmly on her side, against forces that had always seemed too powerful to challenge. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. "There is one more matter," the Duke said, his tone shifting slightly. "Priscilla Hart's behavior toward you ends today. I will not tolerate members of my household threatening or intimidating one another, regardless of personal jealousy or resentment." He moved toward the door and summoned a footman, instructing him to bring Priscilla Hart to the study immediately. Clara's heart raced with a mixture of vindication and nervousness as she waited, uncertain how the confrontation would unfold, but grateful, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she no longer had to face such battles entirely alone. Priscilla Hart arrived at the study door, with her chin lifted and her expression carefully composed, though Clara could see a flicker of nervousness beneath the confidence. The Duke did not offer her a seat. "I understand you have been spreading threats among the staff," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that left no doubt about the seriousness of the matter. Specifically, threats aimed at Clara Whitmore, along with an intention to send correspondence to a household with no business in the affairs of Ashbourne Hall. Priscilla's composure cracked slightly. "Your Grace, I only meant to protect the reputation of this household. It seemed only right that certain parties be informed of who has taken up residence here. It was not your place to inform anyone of anything," the Duke said. "Clara Whitmore's history is her own, and any attempt to use it against her, whether through intimidation or through letters sent to outside parties, will be treated as a serious breach of trust within my household." Clara watched as Priscilla's face shifted from defensive to genuinely alarmed. "Your Grace, surely a simple warning would suffice. I have served this family faithfully for 6 years. Faithful service does not include threatening fellow servants or attempting to cause harm through gossip and correspondence," the Duke replied. "You will not contact Lady Ashford or any other party regarding Clara Whitmore's history. Should I discover that any such letter has been sent, or that you have continued to threaten her in any way, you will find yourself without a position and without references. Do I make myself understood?" Priscilla's face paled considerably. and she nodded quickly, all traces of her earlier confidence gone entirely. "Yes, Your Grace, perfectly understood. You may return to your duties," the Duke said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. After Priscilla departed, hurrying from the room with visibly shaking hands, Clara turned to the Duke with a mixture of gratitude and lingering disbelief. "You did not need to defend me so firmly, Your Grace. I could have managed the situation myself." "Perhaps," the Duke said, "but you should not have to manage such things alone. Not while you remain part of this household. Cruelty thrives when it goes unanswered, Clara. I have watched it happen too many times to allow it beneath my own roof." There was something in the way he spoke, a conviction that ran deeper than simple duty toward his staff, that made Clara wonder about his own history. What experiences had shaped such fierce protectiveness against unchecked cruelty? She did not ask, sensing it was not yet her place to do so, but she filed the curiosity away for another time. Over the following weeks, life at Ashbourne Hall settled into a strange new rhythm. Priscilla kept her distance, no longer bold enough to threaten Clara openly, though the coldness in her eyes remained whenever their paths crossed. Clara continued her duties as before, though she noticed small changes accumulating gradually around her. The physician the Duke had mentioned, a quiet, careful man named Dr. Alden Frost, visited twice weekly to examine her scalp and provide gentle remedies meant to encourage healing and growth. The treatment stung slightly at first, but within a few weeks, Clara began to notice fine new growth emerging in the patches that had once seemed permanently bare. "It will take time," Dr. Frost told her during one visit, examining her scalp with careful, professional hands. "The damage was significant, but not beyond recovery. With patience, most of this will heal in ways that will surprise you." Clara found herself crying quietly after that appointment, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of being cared for, of having someone dedicate genuine effort toward healing wounds she had assumed would remain with her permanently, both the physical scars and the deeper ones underneath. The Duke, too, seemed to seek her out more frequently as the weeks passed, though always within the bounds of propriety that their respective positions demanded. He would find reasons to walk through the gardens when she was tending to outdoor linens, or arrange for her to bring correspondence to his study, rather than leaving such tasks to other staff. During one such garden walk, as autumn leaves scattered across the stone pathways, the Duke asked Clara about her interests beyond her duties, a question no employer had ever bothered to pose before. "I enjoy reading, Your Grace," Clara admitted, somewhat shyly, "though opportunities for such things have been limited in my circumstances." "What sort of books?" he asked, genuine curiosity evident in his tone. "Anything, truthfully," Clara said. "Stories of faraway places, histories of kingdoms long since fallen, even simple poetry when I can find it. My mother taught me to read before she passed, and it has remained one of my few comforts since." The Duke was quiet for a moment, studying her with an expression Clara could not quite decipher. "The library at Ashbourne Hall is rarely used these days. You would be welcome to make use of it, should you find time between your duties." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "Your Grace, surely such a privilege is not meant for household staff." "I make the rules of this household," he said simply, "and I see no reason why access to books should be restricted to those born into privilege, rather than those who simply love to learn." The kindness in his offer left Clara momentarily speechless, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears for the second time that week. "Thank you, Your Grace. I do not know how to properly express my gratitude." "You need not express anything," he said. "Simply enjoy the books, Clara. That will be gratitude enough." As they continued their walk through the gardens, the conversation drifted toward lighter topics: favorite stories, memories of childhood, small observations about the changing seasons. For the first time since arriving at Ashbourne Hall, Clara found herself laughing genuinely, forgetting momentarily the careful guardedness she had maintained for so long. The Duke, too, seemed different during these moments, less burdened by the formal composure he wore like armor during his estate duties. Clara began to glimpse the man beneath the title, someone thoughtful and observant, carrying his own quiet weight of responsibility that seemed, at times, almost as heavy as the burdens she carried herself. It was during one such conversation, as they paused near a stone bench overlooking the estate's small lake, that the Duke revealed something Clara had not expected. "You asked me once why your situation mattered so much to me," he said, staring out across the still water. "I did not give you a complete answer." Clara waited quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. My own mother suffered greatly at the hands of my father before his passing. The Duke continued, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. Not in the same manner as what happened to you, but cruelty nonetheless. Control disguised as care. Criticism disguised as guidance. I watched her diminish slowly over years, watched her lose pieces of herself, until there was little left of the woman she had once been. I was too young then to intervene, too powerless to protect her from a man who held complete authority over both our lives. Clara's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice, a pain she recognized intimately from her own experiences. When I saw your scarf fall, he continued, when I saw the marks left by someone who believed they had the right to harm you, simply because their position allowed it, I saw echoes of everything I failed to prevent for my mother. I could not save her, but I refuse to stand by and allow such cruelty to continue unanswered when it happens within my reach now. Clara reached out instinctively, placing her hand gently over his where it rested on the stone bench. You are not responsible for what happened to your mother, Your Grace. You were a child. There was nothing you could have done. Perhaps, he said, turning his hand slightly to hold hers in return. A gesture that would have been entirely improper between a duke and a housemaid, yet felt, in that quiet moment, entirely natural. But I have carried that helplessness with me ever since. Protecting others where I can, it helps ease a burden I have carried for a very long time. They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of shared understanding settling between them like a bridge built from mutual pain and mutual healing. Clara had never imagined that a man of such position and power could carry wounds so similar to her own, nor had she imagined finding such unexpected comfort in shared vulnerability. As the sun began to set behind the distant hills, casting golden light across the gardens, Clara realized with startling clarity that whatever careful boundaries she had maintained around her heart since arriving at Ashbourne Hall were beginning to crumble in ways she had never anticipated, nor entirely welcomed. She was falling for a man whose position placed him worlds beyond her reach, a man whose sister had already warned her against exactly this outcome. And despite every practical reason to guard against such feelings, Clara found she could no longer deny that something significant had taken root between them, something that would prove impossible to ignore, no matter how carefully either of them tried to maintain the boundaries their different stations demanded. A carriage arrived at Ashbourne Hall, bearing the crest of the Fenwick family, and the entire household scrambled into motion at the news that Lady Beatrice Fenwick had come to call, along with her father, Lord Fenwick, a man known throughout the region for his considerable wealth and his ambitions to secure an advantageous marriage for his only daughter. Clara learned of the visit while helping prepare the formal drawing room, and something cold settled in her stomach at the sight of Lady Beatrice stepping down from the carriage, elegant in deep blue silk, her dark hair perfectly arranged, every inch the picture of aristocratic refinement that Clara could never hope to match. Lady Vera arranged this visit, Mrs. Bennet whispered to Clara as they worked. I overheard her speaking with His Grace about it just this morning. It seems the family has been discussing a match between His Grace and Lady Beatrice for some time now. Clara's hands stilled over the linens she had been arranging. A match, Mrs. Bennet? Marriage, girl, Mrs. Bennet said, not unkindly, though her eyes held a knowing sympathy that made Clara's chest tighten uncomfortably. It would be a sensible arrangement by all accounts. Lord Fenwick's estates border the Duke's northern properties, and such a union would strengthen both families considerably. These things are decided by practical matters, far more often than by personal feeling, I am afraid. Clara nodded, forcing her expression into careful neutrality, despite the ache spreading through her chest. She had known, of course, that whatever connection had grown between herself and the Duke could never lead anywhere beyond friendship, if even that much was permitted between people of such different stations. Lady Vera's warning echoed in her memory, reminding her firmly of exactly the reality she had allowed herself to forget during quiet garden walks and shared confessions beside the lake. She threw herself into her duties that afternoon, keeping busy in the kitchens and laundry rooms, deliberately avoiding any task that might bring her near the drawing room where the Duke entertained his guests. She told herself it did not matter, that she had no right to feel the sharp twist of jealousy curling through her chest whenever she imagined Lady Beatrice's elegant laughter filling rooms. Despite her best efforts, however, fate seemed determined to place her directly in the path of the very situation she wished to avoid. Late in the afternoon, Mrs. Bennet instructed her to deliver fresh tea to the drawing room, as the regular server had fallen ill with a sudden headache. Clara entered as quietly as possible, keeping her eyes low as she arranged the tea service, though she could not help but notice Lady Beatrice's sharp, assessing gaze, studying her with obvious curiosity. "You there," Lady Beatrice said, her voice carrying the practiced elegance of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "You are the maid Lady Vera mentioned, are you not? The one with the unfortunate history?" Clara froze, her hands tightening around the teapot she had been setting down. She glanced quickly toward the Duke, who sat across the room with an expression that had suddenly turned to stone, his eyes fixed sharply on his sister, who occupied the seat beside Lady Beatrice with an air of forced innocence. "I am not certain what you mean, my lady," Clara said carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the discomfort curling through her chest. "Come now," Lady Beatrice said with a light laugh that carried an edge of cruelty beneath its refined surface. "There is no need for false modesty. Lady Vera told me all about your hair, the scars you try so desperately to hide beneath that scarf. It must be terribly difficult, working in a household as grand as this, while carrying such visible reminders of whatever misfortune befell you." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, humiliation and anger warring inside her chest, as she struggled to maintain the composure her position demanded. Before she could formulate a response, the Duke rose sharply from his seat, his expression carrying a coldness Clara had never witnessed directed at anyone before. "That will be quite enough, Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Whatever my sister has chosen to share with you regarding my household staff was shared without my knowledge or consent, and I would ask that such matters not be discussed further in my presence." Lady Beatrice's confident expression faltered slightly at the sharpness in his tone. "Your Grace, I meant no offense. I only observed." "You observed nothing that concerns you," the Duke interrupted firmly. "Clara Whitmore is a valued member of my household, and her personal history is precisely that, personal, and not a topic for casual conversation over afternoon tea." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, Lady Vera's face flushing with obvious embarrassment at having been so directly called out for sharing information she had no business discussing. Lord Fenwick cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly uncertain how to navigate the sudden tension that had descended over what was meant to be a pleasant social visit. Clara, mortified beyond words, quickly finished arranging the tea service and excused herself from the room as swiftly as propriety allowed, her cheeks burning with humiliation despite the Duke's defense of her. She retreated to the small kitchen garden, seeking solitude among the herb beds where she could compose herself away from prying eyes. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, not from Lady Beatrice's cruelty alone, but from the painful reminder of exactly how impossible her situation truly was. Even with the Duke's protection, she remained a servant, a curiosity to be discussed and dismissed by those born into privilege. Forever separated from the world, the Duke inhabited by circumstances of birth she could never overcome. She had not heard the garden gate open, nor the soft footsteps approaching, until the Duke's voice broke through her thoughts. "Clara." She turned quickly, wiping at her eyes before he could notice the tears, though his expression suggested he had already seen far more than she wished him to witness. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, straightening her posture and forcing composure into her voice. "I should return to my duties." "Stay," he said gently, closing the gate behind him. "Please." Clara hesitated, uncertain whether remaining alone with him in the garden, so soon after such a public and humiliating moment, would only deepen the complicated feelings she had been struggling so hard to control. "I owe you an apology," the Duke said, moving closer, though maintaining a respectful distance. "My sister had no right to share your private history with Lady Beatrice, and Lady Beatrice had no right to speak to you in such a manner. I should have anticipated this possibility and prevented it entirely." "You could not have known, Your Grace," Clara said quietly, "and you defended me admirably, more than I had any right to expect." "I would defend you, regardless of expectation," he said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that made Clara's heart race, despite her best efforts to remain guarded. "Clara, I must speak plainly, though I fear the words may complicate matters further between us." She waited, her breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. "My family expects me to consider a match with Lady Beatrice, or someone of similarly appropriate standing," he continued. "It is a practical arrangement, one that would satisfy obligations I have carried since inheriting my title. But I find myself increasingly unable to consider such an arrangement with any genuine enthusiasm, not since you arrived at Ashbourne Hall. Clara's breath caught entirely. Your Grace, please, you must not say such things. Lady Vera has already made clear the expectations placed upon you, and I have no wish to complicate matters that could bring hardship upon your family or your position. And what of my own wishes, Clara? He asked, taking a small step closer. What of what I want, rather than simply what is expected? Your wishes matter greatly, Your Grace, Clara said, her voice trembling slightly, but so do the realities of our respective positions. I am a housemaid, you are a duke. Whatever feelings may exist between us, however genuine, cannot change the world we live in, nor the expectations placed upon someone of your station. The Duke studied her for a long moment, something fierce and determined flickering behind his eyes. Perhaps not immediately, but I refuse to accept that such realities must remain unchangeable forever. Give me time, Clara, that is all I ask. Time to prove that some things matter more than mere practicality and expectation. Clara did not know how to respond to such a bold declaration, torn between the fragile hope blooming in her chest and the practical fear of allowing herself to believe in something that felt impossibly beyond her reach. She said nothing, but she did not step away either, and in the fading evening light, that silence carried its own quiet answer, one neither of them dared to name aloud just yet. A single gold ring went missing from Lady Vera's dressing table 3 days after the Fenwick family departed Ashbourne Hall, and by that same evening, every servant in the household had heard the accusation whispered from one corridor to another. Clara Whitmore, they said, had been seen near Lady Vera's chambers that very morning, delivering fresh linens as part of her ordinary duties. Clara learned of the accusation only when Mrs. Bennet arrived at her door, her expression grim and apologetic in equal measure. Lady Vera insists the ring was taken by someone with access to her rooms, Mrs. Bennet said, and someone has told her you were the last person seen entering her chambers this morning. Clara's stomach dropped. I delivered linens, Mrs. Bennet, nothing more. I never touched anything belonging to Lady Vera, beyond setting down the fresh sheets and collecting the soiled ones. I believe you, child, Mrs. Bennet said gently, but belief alone will not satisfy Lady Vera, nor will it protect you if this accusation reaches His Grace, before the truth can be properly established. Clara's mind raced immediately to Priscilla Hart, whose resentment toward her had never fully faded despite the Duke's earlier warning. She could not prove it, not yet, but the timing felt far too convenient to be mere coincidence. Within the hour, Clara found herself standing before Lady Vera in the formal sitting room, the Duke present as well, his expression carefully composed, though Clara could sense the tension radiating from him. The ring belonged to our mother, Lady Vera said coldly, studying Clara with open suspicion. It holds sentimental value far beyond its material worth. I would ask that you return it immediately, and perhaps I will consider showing leniency regarding your position here. My lady, I have not taken your ring, Clara said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coiling tightly in her chest. I entered your chambers only to exchange linens, exactly as I do every morning throughout this household. And yet the ring vanished the very same morning you were present, Lady Vera pressed. You must understand how such circumstances appear, particularly given your history. The implication in her words stung sharply, the suggestion that Clara's past somehow made her more likely to steal, as though suffering cruelty at another's hands had branded her permanently as untrustworthy. Clara felt tears threaten but forced them back, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her crumble under false accusation. Vera, the Duke said quietly, his tone carrying a warning edge, you have no evidence beyond mere timing and assumption. I would ask that you refrain from accusing members of my household without proper proof. Someone must be held accountable, Edmund, Lady Vera replied sharply. Mother's ring cannot simply disappear without consequence. Then let us find proper proof before assigning blame, the Duke said firmly. He turned to Clara, his expression softening slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained visible. Clara, would you object to your quarters being searched, simply to eliminate any doubt regarding this matter? Clara nodded immediately, grateful for the opportunity to prove her innocence beyond mere words. You will find nothing, because I have taken nothing. The search, conducted respectfully by Mrs. Bennet under the Duke's instruction, revealed exactly what Clara expected. Nothing beyond her own modest belongings and the few books she had recently begun borrowing from the estate library. The ring was nowhere to be found among her possessions. This proves nothing beyond the fact that she did not keep the ring in her own quarters, Lady Vera said, though her confidence had visibly diminished. She could have disposed of it elsewhere, sold it to someone passing through the village. Enough, Vera, the Duke said firmly. You are grasping at accusations without evidence, driven by suspicion rather than fact. I will not allow this to continue. It was Mrs. Bennet, surprisingly, who provided the breakthrough that finally resolved the matter. Later that same evening, while reorganizing the linen closets near the servants' quarters, she discovered the missing ring, tucked carefully inside a small pouch, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, in Priscilla Hart's own room, a hiding place Mrs. Bennet had stumbled upon entirely by accident while searching for a missing set of keys. When confronted, Priscilla's earlier confidence crumbled entirely beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. She confessed, through bitter tears, that she had taken the ring specifically to frame Clara, hoping to see her dismissed from the household entirely and removed from whatever favor she had gained with the Duke. I could not bear watching her rise while I remained overlooked after years of faithful service, Priscilla admitted, her voice breaking. It seemed a simple enough plan, to place blame where suspicion would already fall naturally. The Duke's expression turned to stone as he listened to the confession, and within the hour, Priscilla Hart was dismissed from Ashbourne Hall entirely, sent away without references, her scheme having ultimately cost her far more than the resentment she had originally harbored toward Clara. Lady Vera, to her credit, sought out Clara privately later that evening, her earlier hostility replaced by genuine, if somewhat reluctant, remorse. I owe you an apology, Lady Vera said, standing awkwardly near the doorway of Clara's small sitting room. I allowed suspicion and prejudice to cloud my judgment, rather than seeking proper evidence before assigning blame. That was unfair of me, and I am sorry for the distress I caused you. Clara, surprised by the unexpected apology, nodded graciously. Thank you, my lady. I understand the ring held great sentimental value. Your concern was not entirely unreasonable, given the circumstances. Perhaps, Lady Vera said, studying Clara with newfound curiosity, rather than her previous suspicion. Though I confess, watching how firmly my brother defended you throughout this ordeal has given me much to consider regarding my earlier warnings. Clara said nothing, uncertain how to respond to such an admission, though something in Lady Vera's tone suggested her opposition to whatever connection existed between Clara and the Duke might be softening, however slightly. Over the following days, the household gradually settled back into its usual rhythm, though the incident left its mark on everyone involved. Clara found herself treated with newfound respect by the remaining staff, many of whom had privately suspected Priscilla's jealousy long before the truth finally emerged. The Duke, for his part, seemed even more determined than before to ensure Clara's comfort and safety within the household. He arranged for additional security around the servants' quarters, established clearer channels for staff to report grievances without fear of retaliation, and made a point of personally checking on Clara's well-being more frequently than strict propriety might have suggested was appropriate. One evening, as Clara worked quietly in the estate library, carefully returning a borrowed volume of poetry to its proper shelf, the Duke entered unexpectedly, finding her alone among the tall shelves of books. I wanted to ensure you were recovering well from the recent unpleasantness, he said, moving closer, though maintaining the respectful distance that had become customary between them, however strained by growing feeling on both sides. I am recovering, Your Grace, Clara said, offering a small, genuine smile. Though I confess, this past week has tested my resolve more than I anticipated when I first arrived at Ashbourne Hall. You have shown remarkable strength throughout, the Duke said, his voice carrying quiet admiration. Strength I do not believe many people, regardless of their station, could have matched under similar circumstances. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she remained cautious, mindful of Lady Vera's earlier warnings and the practical realities that still separated their respective positions within society, regardless of whatever growing connection existed between them. Thank you, Your Grace, she said simply, though the weight of everything unspoken between them lingered heavily in the quiet library, waiting patiently for the moment when circumstances might finally allow such feelings to be acknowledged openly. rather than carefully guarded beneath layers of propriety and practical restraint. Snow began falling steadily over Ashbourne Hall as winter settled across the estate, and with it came a letter that would change everything Clara had carefully built over the past several months. The letter arrived addressed directly to the Duke, bearing the wax seal of Thornfield Manor, and Clara knew instantly, upon seeing Mrs. Bennet's troubled expression as she delivered the news, that Lady Miriam Ashford had finally learned of her presence at Ashbourne Hall. The Duke summoned Clara to his study that same afternoon, the letter open on his desk before him, his expression carrying a controlled fury that Clara had not witnessed since the day Priscilla Hart's scheme had finally unraveled. Lady Ashford has written to inform me that a former servant of hers, dismissed for what she describes as inappropriate conduct and attempted manipulation of her son, is currently employed within my household, the Duke said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. She suggests I would be wise to reconsider such employment, given the potential damage to my own reputation, should such history become widely known. Clara's hands trembled at her sides. I feared this moment would come eventually, Your Grace. I am sorry to bring such trouble upon your household. You brought nothing upon this household, the Duke said firmly, rising from his desk. Lady Ashford brought this trouble entirely through her own cruelty and her refusal to accept accountability for what she did to you. I have known her identity for months now, Clara. I have simply been waiting for the right moment to address it properly. What do you intend to do, Your Grace? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I intend to tell her the truth, he said. The complete truth, as you shared it with me, along with the evidence my own investigation has uncovered regarding her treatment of other servants throughout the years. She is not the only person to have suffered at Lady Ashford's hands, Clara. There have been others, servants dismissed without references, accused of misconduct they never committed, subjected to punishments far beyond any reasonable measure of discipline. Clara felt a complicated mixture of vindication and fear settle over her. Confronting her directly could bring significant scandal upon your family, Your Grace. Lady Ashford holds considerable influence among the gentry. Such accusations, even if true, could damage your reputation as much as hers. I have considered that risk carefully, the Duke said, and I have decided the risk is worth taking. Cruelty like hers should not continue unanswered, simply because exposing it carries social consequence. I refuse to remain silent, purely to protect appearances, while she continues harming others, without accountability. Clara studied him carefully, moved by the depth of his conviction, though fear for what such a confrontation might mean for both of them lingered heavily in her chest. Your Grace, I do not wish to be the cause of scandal that follows you and your family for years to come. You would not be the cause, he said gently, moving closer to where she stood. Lady Ashford's own actions are the cause. You are simply the person brave enough to survive them and continue building a life despite everything she attempted to destroy. Before Clara could respond further, a footman knocked urgently at the study door, informing them that Lady Ashford herself had arrived unannounced, her carriage having pulled up the drive only moments earlier, apparently unwilling to wait for a written response to her letter. Clara's blood ran cold at the news. She is here, Your Grace? Now? It appears so, the Duke said, his expression hardening with fresh resolve. Perhaps it is better this way. We shall address the matter directly, rather than through the careful distance of correspondence. Clara felt panic rising in her chest at the thought of facing Lady Ashford again, after everything that had happened. The woman who had caused such lasting damage, both physical and emotional, standing before her once more within these very walls. You do not have to face her if you are not ready, the Duke said, noticing her visible distress. I can address this matter alone, if you prefer to remain elsewhere during the conversation. Clara took a steadying breath, drawing strength from a place deep within herself that had carried her through every hardship since that terrible night at Thornfield Manor. No, Your Grace. I have hidden from this long enough. I would prefer to face her directly, with the truth finally spoken aloud, rather than buried beneath fear and false explanations. The Duke studied her with evident pride and respect. Then we shall face her together. They made their way to the main drawing room, where Lady Ashford waited with the same commanding presence Clara remembered vividly from her time at Thornfield Manor, though the years had added new lines of bitterness around her mouth and eyes that Clara did not recall from before. Your Grace, Lady Ashford said smoothly upon their entrance, rising to offer a practiced curtsy. I do hope you received my letter regarding a matter of some delicacy concerning your household staff." "I received it," the Duke said coldly, gesturing for Clara to remain beside him, rather than retreating to the background as household protocol might normally dictate. "And I find myself with several questions of my own, Lady Ashford, regarding your own conduct toward the servants in your employ." Lady Ashford's confident expression flickered slightly, as her eyes fell upon Clara standing beside the Duke rather than behind him. "Your Grace, I am uncertain what you mean to imply." "I mean to imply exactly what my investigation has already confirmed," the Duke said, his voice carrying an authority that filled the entire room. "That you personally caused the injuries Clara Whitmore carries to this day, cutting her hair as punishment for suspicions you never bothered to properly investigate, driven by unfounded jealousy, rather than any genuine misconduct on her part." Lady Ashford's face paled, though she attempted to maintain her composure. "Your Grace, surely you do not believe the fabricated accusations of a dismissed servant over the word of someone of my own standing." "I do not rely solely on her word," the Duke said. "I have spoken with 3 other former members of your household staff, all dismissed under remarkably similar circumstances, all describing patterns of cruelty and unfounded accusation that align precisely with what Clara herself experienced. This is not an isolated incident, Lady Ashford. This is a pattern of behavior I intend to see properly addressed." Lady Ashford's carefully maintained composure finally cracked entirely, her expression twisting into something far less refined than the elegant mask she typically presented to society. "You cannot possibly believe that servants deserve the same consideration as those of proper breeding and standing. Discipline is necessary to maintain order within any household." "Discipline and cruelty are not the same thing," the Duke said firmly, his voice carrying quiet but unmistakable fury. "What you did to Clara Whitmore was not discipline. It was an act of deliberate harm, inflicted upon someone with no power to defend herself, against your position and influence. That ends today, Lady Ashford." Clara watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of vindication and lingering disbelief, watching the woman who had once held such terrifying power over her life, reduced to sputtering, ineffective protests before the Duke's unwavering resolve. For the first time since that terrible night at Thornfield Manor, Clara felt something shift permanently within her chest, the weight of shame and fear she had carried for so long, finally beginning to lift, replaced by the quiet, steady strength of finally being believed, finally being defended, finally being seen as someone worthy of protection rather than dismissal. Lady Ashford's face twisted with fury as she realized the confrontation was not proceeding according to whatever plan she had imagined during her carriage ride to Ashbourne Hall. "Your Grace, I would caution you against making such serious accusations against someone of my standing. I have friends among the highest circles of society, connections that could make life considerably difficult for you and your family, should you continue down this path." "Are you threatening me, Lady Ashford?" the Duke asked, his voice deceptively calm, despite the hardness in his eyes. "I am simply reminding you of the realities of our world," Lady Ashford replied, attempting to regain her earlier composure. "Reputation matters a great deal, Your Grace, for both of us. Perhaps it would be wiser for everyone involved if this matter were quietly forgotten, rather than pursued further." "You mean it would be more convenient for you?" Clara said suddenly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Both the Duke and Lady Ashford turned to look at her, clearly not expecting her to speak without being directly addressed. "You dare address me directly, girl?" Lady Ashford said, her earlier composure cracking further into open disdain. "I dare, because I have nothing left to fear from you," Clara said, standing taller than she had in months, perhaps years. "You have already done the worst you could do to me, Lady Ashford. You took my hair, my position, my sense of safety in the world. But you did not take my voice, and I refuse to remain silent while you attempt to threaten your way out of consequences for what you did." Lady Ashford stared at Clara with an expression somewhere between shock and fury, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged so directly by someone she considered so far beneath her own station. "The girl fabricated the entire situation," Lady Ashford said, turning back to the Duke, though her voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "She sought to manipulate my son through inappropriate familiarity, and when I addressed the matter appropriately, she chose to twist the story into one of victimhood rather than accepting responsibility for her own conduct." I have spoken with your son directly, Lady Ashford, the Duke said, revealing information that clearly caught her entirely off guard. Through careful and discreet inquiry, of course, given the sensitivity of the matter. He confirmed that Clara behaved with complete propriety throughout her employment in your household, offering nothing beyond simple kindness during a difficult period in his life. He also confirmed that you forbade him from intervening on her behalf when you decided to punish her, threatening to disinherit him entirely should he attempt to defend her innocence. Lady Ashford's face went completely white, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, clearly realizing that her carefully constructed narrative had entirely collapsed beneath the weight of contradicting evidence gathered from multiple independent sources. "What do you intend to do with this information, Your Grace?" she finally asked, her voice noticeably smaller than it had been upon her arrival. "I intend to ensure that Clara Whitmore's reputation is fully and publicly restored," the Duke said. "I will be sending letters to every household with whom you maintain social connection, detailing the truth of what occurred, along with the corroborating accounts of the other servants you have similarly mistreated over the years. I will not allow you to continue operating under the protection of false respectability, while those without power to defend themselves continue suffering under your cruelty. You would destroy my reputation entirely," Lady Ashford said, horror evident in her voice, as she began to grasp the full weight of the Duke's intentions. "I would simply reveal the truth," the Duke replied. "Whatever destruction follows from that truth belongs entirely to the choices you made, not to my decision to expose them." Lady Ashford's eyes darted toward Clara, something desperate flickering behind her expression. Surely we might find some manner of arrangement, some compromise that would satisfy everyone involved without such drastic public exposure. "There is no compromise to be found," Clara said firmly, drawing strength from the Duke's steady presence beside her. "You did not offer me any compromise when you cut my hair and cast me out with nothing beyond a fabricated story of misconduct. You do not deserve compromise now, simply because the consequences have finally caught up with your actions." Lady Ashford's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight visibly draining from her posture as she recognized the futility of further protest. "What is it you want from me, then? An apology?" "I want nothing from you," Clara said, and found, to her genuine surprise, that the words were entirely true. "I do not need your apology to know the truth of what happened, nor do I need your validation to move forward with my life. What happens next is entirely the Duke's decision, based on his own sense of justice, rather than any personal need I carry toward you." The Duke studied Clara with visible admiration at her steady composure, before turning his attention back to Lady Ashford. "You will leave Ashbourne Hall today, Lady Ashford, and you will consider carefully how you choose to treat those in your employ going forward, because I assure you, I will be watching closely from this point forward. Should I learn of any further mistreatment toward your household staff, the letters I mentioned will be sent without hesitation." Lady Ashford, thoroughly defeated, gathered what remained of her dignity and departed without further protest, her carriage disappearing down the snow-covered drive within the hour, leaving behind a silence that felt, to Clara, remarkably like freedom. "Thank you, Your Grace," Clara said quietly, once they were finally alone in the drawing room, "for believing me, for investigating the truth so thoroughly, for standing beside me throughout all of this." "You have nothing to thank me for," the Duke said, turning to face her directly, his expression carrying a warmth that made Clara's heart race, despite the exhausting events of the afternoon. "You faced her with more courage than I have witnessed from grown men, confronting far less intimidating circumstances. I am the one who should be thanking you, Clara, for allowing me to be part of finally reclaiming what she attempted to take from you." Clara felt tears finally slip free, though these carried none of the fear or shame of her earlier tears, only the overwhelming relief of a burden finally set down after being carried for far too long. The Duke reached out gently, wiping away a single tear with careful tenderness, his hand lingering against her cheek in a manner that spoke of feelings neither of them had yet dared to name aloud. "Clara," he said softly, "I believe the time has come for us to speak plainly about what exists between us, without fear of propriety or expectation standing in our way any longer." Clara's breath caught, hope and uncertainty warring within her chest as she waited for whatever words would follow, sensing that everything she had endured, every hardship survived, had led inevitably toward this singular, uncertain moment between them. A messenger arrived from the capital only 2 days after Lady Ashford's departure, bearing news that threatened to unravel the fragile peace Clara had only just begun to enjoy. Lord Fenwick, having heard rumors of the confrontation with Lady Ashford, along with growing whispers throughout the county regarding the Duke's evident attachment to a housemaid, had written demanding immediate clarification regarding his daughter's prospective engagement to Duke Edmund Harcourt. The Duke read the letter in his study, his expression darkening with each line, before setting it aside and calling for Clara to join him. Lord Fenwick believes rumors of our connection threaten his daughter's reputation, the Duke explained once Clara arrived. He demands that I either formally commit to Lady Beatrice immediately, silencing such rumors entirely, or publicly deny any romantic involvement with you, in order to protect his family's standing. Clara's stomach twisted painfully. Your Grace, perhaps it would be wisest to honor Lord Fenwick's request. Your family's reputation, your sister's future prospects, all of it could suffer greatly, should you choose otherwise. And what of my own future, Clara? The Duke asked, moving closer, his eyes carrying the same fierce determination she had witnessed during his confrontation with Lady Ashford. What of my own happiness? Weighed against the practical concerns of families seeking advantageous alliances. Your happiness matters greatly to me, Your Grace, Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. But I could never forgive myself if my presence here caused lasting damage to your family's standing, or your sister's prospects for a good marriage. Lady Vera has already spoken with me on this matter, the Duke said, surprising Clara considerably. She witnessed how thoroughly I defended you against both Priscilla's scheme and Lady Ashford's cruelty. She has come to understand, however reluctantly at first, that whatever exists between us carries a depth and sincerity she cannot in good conscience continue opposing. Clara's eyes widened with surprise. Lady Vera approves? She has come to accept it, the Duke clarified, which, from someone as protective of family reputation as my sister, represents considerable progress. She recognizes now that genuine happiness matters more than practical arrangement, particularly after witnessing firsthand the kind of person you truly are, Clara, beneath whatever assumptions she initially carried regarding your position. Before Clara could respond further, a firm knock interrupted them, and Lady Vera herself entered the study, her expression carrying an unusual mixture of determination and vulnerability. I wish to speak with both of you together, Lady Vera said, closing the door behind her. Regarding Lord Fenwick's letter, and regarding matters that extend well beyond simple practical arrangement. Clara and the Duke exchanged a glance before turning their full attention to Lady Vera. I have spent considerable time observing you these past months, Clara, Lady Vera continued. I confess I approached our earlier interactions with suspicion and prejudice I am not proud of. I judged you based on your position rather than your character, assuming the worst simply because I feared losing my brother to circumstances I considered beneath our family's standing. I understood your concerns, my lady, Clara said gently. Family loyalty is not something to be ashamed of. Perhaps not, Lady Vera said, but blind prejudice, masquerading as loyalty, is something entirely different. I watched you endure Priscilla's cruelty with dignity. I watched you face Lady Ashford with a courage I am not certain I could have mustered under similar circumstances. And I watched my brother, a man I have known my entire life to guard his emotions carefully behind duty and obligation, finally allow himself genuine happiness for the first time since our mother's passing. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes at the unexpected warmth in Lady Vera's words. I will write to Lord Fenwick myself, Lady Vera continued, turning to her brother. I will explain that whatever rumors have reached him regarding your affections carry genuine substance, and that Lady Beatrice deserves a match built on mutual regard, rather than settling for an arrangement where her husband's heart clearly belongs elsewhere. She deserves better than that, Edmund, just as you deserve better than a marriage built on convenience alone. The Duke's expression softened considerably as he embraced his sister warmly. Thank you, Vera. This means more than I can properly express. Do not thank me yet, Lady Vera said, though a small smile tugged at her lips. There remains the matter of how society will receive news of your intended match, should you choose to pursue things properly with Clara. Whispers and rumors are one matter. A formal announcement carries far greater consequence. I am prepared to face whatever consequence society chooses to impose, the Duke said firmly, turning back to face Clara directly. provided Clara herself is prepared to face such consequence alongside me. Clara's heart pounded as she absorbed the full weight of what was unfolding before her, the possibility of a future she had never dared imagine, suddenly presenting itself with startling clarity. Your Grace, I would face any consequence, endure any hardship society might impose, if it meant building a life alongside someone who has shown me such genuine kindness and unwavering protection. The Duke's expression shifted into something Clara had never witnessed from him before, an open, unguarded joy that transformed his usually composed features entirely. He reached for her hands, holding them gently within his own. "Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying quiet reverence. "You arrived at Ashbourne Hall, carrying wounds inflicted by cruelty you did nothing to deserve. You have shown more courage, more resilience, and more genuine grace throughout these past months than anyone I have encountered in my entire life. I find myself utterly and completely devoted to you, regardless of whatever practical obstacles society might place before us." Lady Vera quietly excused herself from the room, granting them the privacy such a moment clearly deserved, leaving Clara and the Duke standing together amid the warm glow of the study's fireplace, the weight of every hardship they had each carried, finally beginning to lift entirely away. "I have one final matter to address," the Duke said, his expression growing momentarily serious once more. "Before we speak further of our future together, I wish for you to know that whatever scars remain, whether visible upon your scalp or hidden within your heart, they do not diminish you in any way. They are simply part of the story that led you here, to this moment, to whatever future we choose to build together from this point forward." Clara felt fresh tears slip free, though these carried nothing but overwhelming gratitude and hope. "Thank you, Edmund," she said softly, using his given name for the very first time, testing its weight upon her tongue, and finding it fit perfectly within the new reality unfolding before them both. Spring arrived at Ashbourne Hall with a gentleness that felt, to Clara, like the natural conclusion of everything the harsh winter months had finally allowed to heal. She stood before the same cracked mirror that had once reflected her fear and shame back at her, though the mirror itself had long since been replaced with a finer one, a gift from the Duke shortly after their engagement had been formally announced throughout the county. Her hair, once thin and scarred beneath a carefully wound scarf, had grown back fuller than she ever imagined possible, thanks to months of patient care from Dr. Frost and the gentle remedies he had provided. Small marks remained here and there, faint reminders of what she had endured, but they no longer carried the weight of shame they once had. Instead, Clara had come to view them as evidence of survival, proof of resilience, rather than sources of embarrassment to be hidden away. The announcement of the Duke's engagement to a former housemaid had, predictably, caused considerable stir throughout society. Some among the gentry whispered disapprovingly, unable to accept a match that crossed such traditional boundaries of station and birth. Others, upon learning the full truth of Clara's history and the courage she had shown throughout her ordeal with Lady Ashford, found themselves quietly admiring the Duke's choice, recognizing genuine character as far more valuable than mere lineage or fortune. Lady Beatrice Fenwick, rather than harboring resentment, had written a surprisingly gracious letter to Clara shortly after the engagement announcement, expressing genuine well wishes and admitting that her own father's ambitions for the match had never truly reflected her personal feelings on the matter. She had since found happiness with a gentleman of her own choosing, a match built on mutual affection rather than practical arrangement, and Clara found herself grateful that everyone involved had ultimately found their way toward genuine happiness rather than settling for convenient obligation. Lady Ashford, meanwhile, had retreated from public society almost entirely following the Duke's careful but thorough exposure of her cruelty toward household staff over the years. The letters he promised had indeed been sent, resulting in significant damage to her reputation among the circles she had once dominated so confidently. Clara felt no particular satisfaction in her downfall, though she recognized a quiet sense of justice in knowing that Lady Ashford would no longer hold such unchecked power over those unfortunate enough to enter her employ. As Clara finished arranging her hair for the day, a soft knock sounded at her door, and Lady Vera entered, carrying a small wooden box with careful reverence. "I wish to give you something before the ceremony," Lady Vera said, opening the box to reveal a delicate hair ornament crafted from silver and small pearls, clearly an heirloom of considerable age and value. "This belonged to our mother. She wore it on her own wedding day, many years ago, before circumstances of her own marriage brought her such sorrow. I believe she would be pleased to see it worn again by someone who has shown the kind of strength and grace she herself possessed, despite everything life demanded of her. Clara accepted the gift with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the significance of such a gesture, from a woman who had once viewed her with such open suspicion. "Thank you, Lady Vera. I am honored beyond words. We are family now, Clara," Lady Vera said warmly, helping to carefully secure the ornament within Clara's carefully arranged hair. "Or we shall be, within the hour. Please, call me Vera, from this point forward." The wedding ceremony took place in the small chapel on the Ashbourne estate grounds, surrounded by close family, trusted household staff who had witnessed Clara's journey from frightened new arrival to beloved future Duchess, and a handful of society members who had come to genuinely respect the courage and character both Clara and Edmund had displayed throughout their unconventional courtship. Mrs. Bennet wept openly throughout the ceremony, having grown fond of Clara since that very first chaotic morning, when the Duke's early arrival had thrown the entire household into panic. Dr. Frost stood proudly among the guests, having witnessed firsthand the remarkable healing, both physical and emotional, that Clara had undergone since arriving at Ashbourne Hall. As Clara stood before Edmund at the altar, exchanging vows that spoke of partnership, protection, and unwavering devotion, she found her mind drifting briefly back to that terrifying night at Thornfield Manor, the cold scissors, the cruel words, the overwhelming fear that her life had been irrevocably damaged, beyond any hope of happiness or dignity. She realized, standing there in the soft spring light filtering through the chapel windows, that Lady Ashford's cruelty, while it had left lasting marks upon her body, had never truly succeeded in breaking her spirit. If anything, surviving that ordeal had led her directly toward the life and love she now stood ready to embrace fully. Proof that even the deepest wounds could eventually heal into something resembling strength rather than permanent damage. "I take you, Clara Whitmore," Edmund said, his voice carrying quiet emotion as he looked into her eyes with unwavering devotion, "to stand beside always, to protect always, to cherish every part of who you are, including every scar and every story that led you here to me." Clara felt tears slip free as she responded in kind, her voice steady despite the overwhelming emotion of the moment. "I take you, Edmund Harcourt, to stand beside always, to trust completely, and to build a life together where cruelty finds no welcome, and where kindness and courage are honored above all else." As they exchanged their first kiss as husband and wife, applause and cheers erupted throughout the small chapel, the gathered guests celebrating a union that had defied convention and proven, quite thoroughly, that genuine love and character mattered far more than birth or station. Years later, Clara would often think back on that terrifying morning when her scarf had fallen away before the Duke's watchful eyes, revealing scars she had spent weeks desperately trying to hide. She would remember the simple question he had asked, spoken with such quiet determination that it had changed the entire course of her life. "Who did this to you?" That single question had led to justice for herself and for others who had suffered similarly beneath Lady Ashford's cruelty. It had led to genuine friendship, then deep affection, and eventually to a love built on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and unwavering protection. It had led to healing, both of the visible scars that had once marked her scalp and the deeper wounds that had marked her spirit and her sense of self-worth. Most importantly, that question had taught Clara something she carried with her for the rest of her life. Cruelty thrives in silence and shame, but courage and truth, when finally spoken aloud, possess the power to heal wounds far deeper than anyone might initially believe possible. Clara Whitmore, now Duchess of Ashbourne, never forgot where she came from, nor the pain that had once threatened to define her entirely. But she also never allowed that pain to remain the final word of her story. Instead, she built a new chapter, filled with love, protection, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was, finally and completely, seen, valued, and unforgotten by the one person who had chosen to ask the question that changed everything.